Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Taos, Baltimore. We are Baltimore Positive, positively taking the show out on the road all week long. We're at Gertrude's on Wednesday, Friday at Costas in Dundalk, and then on the Tuesday next week, we'll be at Missoni's in Perry Hall. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. They've given me when I hold the Harlem Globetrotters logo up, I just want to whistle Sweet Georgia Brown, but I know they're coming to town as well, and we will have some winning tickets as well. All of it brought to you by our friends at GBMC, as well as Farnan and Dermer, the comfort guys, getting us on the road here, making my HVAC work for winter and summer and spring. And there was a fall, and it was almost 30 years ago now. It was 29 years ago when this guy was my boss on Wednesday nights at Sheffield Studios. Will Schwarz is a three-decade friend of mine. I don't know that I've ever had him on the show. I think I've threatened to have him on several times, including back when Dan Rodricks was doing his first show, which was controversial. Dan, columnist guy, doing thespian things. And I sort of knew Dan had his acting Jones about him, and he and I have discussed Eric Bogosian and sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all sorts of things. But Will has been, I don't want to, do I call you a consigliere for Dan Rodricks, or are you just an
No,
executive producer and
I would
creator?
just say just a friend, mostly a friend.
Well, give me your story, because my story with you is I got a call from maybe you saying that I was going to do this show with Buddy Ryan and Lawrence Taylor. I don't know that I've run into you 5 times in the last 29 years since then, but I
Yeah.
think we've been in touch in some ways on social
Yeah.
media. And I knew of your affection with Dan, and you guys had me on your show, your Kitschy Kitchen at
Right.
Channel 2 with Rodricks for breakfast. I wish I
Right.
had the mug. I tell Dan that all the time.
I still
But
have one. Yeah. That was actually the most fun I think I've ever had in television. It was like they gave the keys to the asylum, to the inmates. It was Saturday morning and then it was Sunday morning. No one was caring what we were doing. And so we were able to really get away with a lot of stuff that we probably wouldn't
it
get away
was
with.
great.
It was a
That
lot of
show
fun.
was great. I
It
tell
was a lot of
Dan that
fun.
all the time. Was
Yeah.
because it was like a stream of consciousness, kind of crazy, wacky weekend morning show that
Yeah.
wasn't like the Today Show, and it wasn't like Good Morning, and it wasn't like late night television a little bit too.
No.
It had a little
Yeah.
bit of Letterman, but maybe not so much,
Yeah,
right?
but it was very Baltimore, right? I mean, we could do one live shot a week. This was before all the technology, the microwave technology that exists now. But so the very first show we did, we had a live shot from Paper Moon, which is a wacky kind of a place, all the toys all over the place and stuff. It was fun. We did another one from backstage at the BSO before we were highlighting one of the musicians there who's still playing with the BSO, and Ellen Pendleton. She's in the violins, and she had just joined the orchestra. And we did a little feature on her. And then right as we were going off the air, she was going onto the stage to perform. So that was pretty cool.
Well, I remember coming out. I called it the Kitschy Kitchen,
Yeah.
and I mean, you've been involved in television and stage and all of this, all of these years. And I want to bring full color to why you're here, because we'll have a little bit of fun with Buddy Ryan and Lawrence Taylor and our old
Right.
television show from 30 years ago and how I know you. But I've known Dan. I've known of Dan on television probably in the early 80s. I was Dan's colleague beginning in 1986. And I tell Dan this, and it embarrasses him because it's 40 years ago. He was larger than life to me as the columnist, the young columnist who had something, who you wanted to read, and who was irreverent in such a way. And I think over the 40 years, his caring and love of Baltimore. It's one thing for a guy from Dundalk to love Baltimore. It's
Right.
different for someone to be transplanted. And
Right.
I don't know of your relationship with him. I have asked him about you before, and he knew that you and I had done a thing together years ago, and
Yeah.
I knew you had done the Kitchen Kitchen. But I don't know of your relationship with him, because I think Dan is special. He's a special human, and I
Yeah.
think he's collected so many people in our community after coming here and not knowing anybody 50
Right.
years ago, that he is an iconic Baltimore brand unto himself. And I
Yeah.
never know how people came at him to
Yeah.
become co-conspirators and doing all this Baltimore theater
Right.
that you guys do
Right.
that I love.
What I say about Dan is that he's not from Baltimore, but he's of Baltimore. He is clearly embraced and has been embraced by the city, and that's because I think, well, a lot of reasons. I first knew Dan I met him at Channel 11, actually. I was a producer there, and I was the sports producer there for a while when Chris Thomas and Vince Bagley were on the air. And that's how I knew him. He was doing features once a week, I think, at that time. And then he
He would
developed.
walk the streets and do wacky things and interview empty boxes and do, he was a wild, it was a wild thing.
Yeah,
It was an actor kind of thing. And Marty Bass did catching back, like that was a thing in the 80s to put the man on the street to talk to the people
yeah,
who had fun. I mean, Rob Roblin, nobody was better in the world than Rob
right,
Roblin,
right,
right?
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Ron Matz in the mornings. I mean, there's a long tradition of that, but
right.
a lot of that was born out of the early 80s in television and local television. And Dan, and I'll put Marty in there with that and just saying that that's what the shtick was,
Yeah.
right? Was go
Well,
find a story, right?
it was, but Dan was really, I think he is more tuned into, more meaningful kinds of it. It wasn't so much a shtick as he was looking for interesting stories, offbeat often, but it wasn't random. It was deliberate. He
We
chose
had an
the.
offbeat mayor at the time
Oh,
right? I mean,
he
we
still
were,
does. Yeah, yeah,
and that
absolutely.
played into all of the
Mhm.
chicanery that the mayor had rubber duckies and
Right.
suits at the aquarium, and I mean it was a glorious time for
Yeah,
Baltimore too. I mean,
yeah,
as I sit here with the harbor behind me,
right.
Dan came into age of all of that, and I guess that's where Will, that first show he did, the You Have No Idea show,
Yeah,
I had Dan on, and Dan thinks I kiss his ass too much and I embarrass him, and he doesn't like to do long segments with me. It's always a little more shorter and political and this and
yeah,
that. But he
yeah.
came on, and I got into his head about Bogosian and where he was going, and he used to do this Don Donaldo act at Jack Lemon's house in the backyard
I'd
at
forgotten
Jack
about that.
Lemon's Oktoberfest every year when I was
Yeah,
19 years old.
yeah,
And again, I was taken by Dan just in a general sense of how talented he
yeah,
was, what a great writer he
yeah,
was, how the television thing worked, but also his complexities as I've gotten to know him over a lifetime, that how deep he can be. And I went to that first show after having him on and wondering, I knew it would be good because I have trust in Dan. I just knew,
yeah.
like, I'm going to buy tickets and I don't know what I'm getting, but I know it's going to be good. That night, I laughed, I cried, I sobbed, I left the building, and I've known Dan my whole life. And I said, and I told people that I knew how extraordinary it was. And the next year, I bought 50 tickets, and I took every one of my clients and their spouses and every extraordinary friend in my life who loves Baltimore, and the good folks at the BMA and Ann, everybody at Gertrude's, John Shields, who turns out to be my cousin. My son married into his family.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we put an event together at Christmas that year that became my family friends radio station. It was my holiday event, and Fadley's catered it inside the BMA, and I brought 50 people down
Mhm.
and just took them in there and said, you want to understand Baltimore, what Baltimore is about, my town, like, watch this show.
Right.
And they all watched it. They all sent me letters the day after. They all wanted to reach to Dan and thank him. And then out of that came the courtroom, which I didn't see. I was on vacation when he did
Yeah.
that show. I wasn't physically here. I hope he said he's bringing it back. And then this 66 thing, which my last name's Aparicio, right? I got here because of 1966 and that Oriole team in this city. I'm very Hispanic, although I thought I was white for a long time, Will. I was the Hispanic host back on Beat the Pros. And I am fascinated to see what he's come up with because he didn't lead on too much about what it's going to
Yeah.
be.
Well,
But I can't wait to see the show, Will.
it's different. It's different than the other two shows. It's not really so much about Dan's experience as it is about Baltimore at that time, which was I'm looking at the harbor, just when this takes place, Mayor McKeldin, the once mayor and once governor at that time, he was his second term as mayor. He was actually lobbying LBJ, who was president in '66, to get money to develop the harbor. At that point, a harbor place, it was still a place you go to dump a body, and so a lot of this show is really about what racial politics and politics in general in Baltimore at that crossroads. it was an interesting time. I mean, I think we think about it in Baltimore. We think, well, oh, that's the first the first Brooks World Series. He leaps, that kind of thing. But there was a lot of stuff going on at that time, and I think that's
And
what
Kennedy had been shot, and I mean,
Kennedy had
just a
been shot,
lot of
and
things were going on at that time. Certainly racially in America,
Malcolm
right?
X had been shot the year before,
Martin Luther
and
King was alive.
Martin Luther King was alive, but that was yet to come. So we're kind of in that, in that cradle of violence, really, at that time. So it's really interesting in that it kind of reflects the racial politics and uses the story of the Orioles as a way to tell that narrative.
Well, my cousin came here and found that from Chicago, and Frank Robinson came here and found a very. I mean, my cousin couldn't barely speak English to this day. His English isn't great, and he's
Yeah.
90. So, yeah, I would just say, um, I grew up in the late 70s. The Hispanic part of my family story and what I lived here in the 70s and 80s, where nobody spoke Spanish. My dad had to drive to DC to get a plantain. I hadn't thought much about Frank Robinson's experience
Yeah.
until I became a man, until I became an adult, until I started to realize what redlining was all about and what Martin Luther King was all about and what the city looked like and felt like. And I grew up in Dundalk and Turner Station, and there's a long history there that I've taken on with black teachers of mine, friends, people I've grown up with about. There were two different worlds in Baltimore in 1966, and I'm
Right.
sure that this show
Yeah.
shows
And
the
it
real side of that, right?
exactly, it really brings that out, and it shows how the two narratives, with the Orioles and then the city, they kind of support. They made each other possible, right? Um, Frank, at the time, the Orioles had the fewest black players in the major leagues, which is stunning to me. Before he came here, I mean, in 1966, there were three black players on the team. I would have thought for sure the Red Sox would have been fewer, but actually the Red Sox had six, even though the Red Sox were the last team to integrate when that was in 1959 with Pumpsie Green. Think about that, by the way. 12 years after Jackie Robinson, that's how long it took for the Red Sox to get a black player. Um, but in 1966, they had six, and the Orioles only had three, including Frank Robinson, Sam Bowens, Paul Blair. So, in many ways, Frank made Baltimore's success possible,
Well,
certainly on the
Frank's
field.
experience in Cincinnati was a whole other thing too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, Frank in Cincinnati was a real mess at that point. And I guess Baltimore probably wasn't much better
Well,
against the lure, and that's one of the reasons I want to see Dan show in his portrayal of
yeah.
this.
Yeah. Well, they had a pretty good team in 65, but they won over 90 games. They just didn't make, they didn't, they were third place, even winning over 90 games, 94 games, something like that.
Will Schwarz is my guest. What conspirator? What are you with Rodricks here? What are you going to call
Well,
yourself here?
I'm a producer on the show. I'm working on helping with a lot of the visuals. One of the conceits of the Rodricks productions are that we have that screen in the back, so it kind of adds to, since the stage is so small and there's such a limited cast of characters, we kind of augment the narrative with visuals in the back so that you'll see um, you know uh, people that we're talking about, a lot of newspaper headlines, especially in this time when there was a lot of racial tension in the city. You had a guy like George Mahoney, who was running for governor, who was, an abject racist.
I mentioned George Wallace in the conversation with
Yeah,
Dan Rodricks as a Republican, and he reminded me, no, dude, he was a Democrat. And I'm like,
yeah,
oh yeah, for the Dixies, I forgot about that.
right.
Like,
Well,
like yeah, and even my conflation of history can be twisted all these years later with Trumpism, right? I mean, it just kind of
right.
twisted the world.
Right. Yeah. Well, another interesting thing about this is that McKeldin, it was a Republican, and he was he was a champion of civil rights. He was, he's what, as Dan calls, I think in the show, it's a species that's extinct, a liberal Republican. There are no more, in the mold of Rockefeller or George Romney or others. They don't exist anymore, and yet he was able to get elected governor and mayor twice in Maryland, in Baltimore, and as a Republican. He was the last Republican to be elected mayor in Baltimore, interestingly enough.
Well, the history lesson is here, and you and I have a little history together. So, what would like if my wife were here and I told her that this is the guy that produced the Buddy Ryan Lawrence Taylor thing back in the day, and I saw Lawrence in Miami 5 years ago, and we said hello, and it's the first time I had seen him
Yeah,
since the night we depart. Literally, I had never been in a room with Lawrence to grab him and say hello.
yeah,
So I had my 10 minutes in Miami at the convention center. I was at Radio Row. It was right before the plague. It was like January of 2020. So I remember we
yeah,
took a picture together.
yeah.
And I tell that story because I haven't done a lot of television, although I don't know what this is. But back in the day, you were the first one to ever put me on TV. It was a
I don't
brokerage
regret
show.
it.
Oh, really?
I do not regret it.
Well, you were the
Yeah,
first one to put me on TV, and I will tell you my story because if we were doing a cocktail
yeah,
party, and I don't know if you even know this, I remember it vividly. Everything we did 15 shows together. We did them up at the Sheffield studios. Lawrence Taylor had a major drug problem, and there was trouble getting him in and out on a weekly basis. There were planes, trains, cars, automobiles. There was literally limos. There was everything to get Lawrence there. Buddy, meanwhile, would just fly up from Louisville and New Southwest Airlines, and Buddy just fell in love with me from the minute he saw me. Like literally, I remember being in the lounge area there with bagels, and there was enough food to feed 50 people because that's the way Warren rolled it out,
right.
Lasky. And there were four of us and three producers and a couple of camera people that all got to know each other. And from the minute I met Buddy Ryan, it led me to Rex and Rob and this relationship that football happened,
Yeah,
and Buddy's long gone. And I saw Buddy many times after that because he was always at the Cincinnati Ravens game because
mhm,
Rex was coaching for the Ravens. So I
right.
saw Buddy a dozen
Regular.
more times before he died
Yeah,
in life and would text, write to him and back and forth. Lawrence went away. Mike Warren came back into my life about 2 years ago, and we said hello and caught up a little bit. But
yeah,
you've been this recurring character, and you're the only cast of characters from this television show from all of these years ago that have these pictures and these images. And we went to the barn one night and did all that stuff. It is one of the weird thrills of my life that I actually weirdly got to do it and do a real television show because I've never done anything like it since before. And I
it
was
was
one and
fun.
done in the industry, Will.
It was fun. Yeah, well, I was as well. I didn't, I'm not quite sure how many. I don't remember how many seasons we actually did with that show. Maybe I was only involved in three at most. I think I can't remember to tell you the truth. How is Mike though? I haven't seen him in ages.
Good. We were going to get a beverage together up at the Cooper's, and we just fell out. But we
Yeah,
talked on the phone for a good half an
yeah,
hour. And Michael Warren, of course, was involved in Mike Warren Sports and gambling before it
yeah,
was a thing,
yeah,
and also owned the Pier Five and bought the Eddie Murray ball and like all of that
yeah,
kind. He loves sports.
yeah.
So yeah, Mike's. So that show for me, when I tell my wife and show people pictures, they're like, well, that's peculiar. You did a gambling show with Buddy Ryan and Lawrence Taylor back in the day. And I
Yeah.
will just say this, I had never done it before. And I told Buddy how nervous I was. And I know you knew how nervous I was. They put makeup on my face and shaved it. It was like, I felt like I was Scott Garceau. I felt like Chris Thomas. I felt like a big deal. And I went on that day, and Buddy, this is what made him such an incredible man and a coach. He gave me confidence. He was
That's
like
great.
that guy.
Yeah,
He would like even like after the first show, he's like, "You feel like you've been doing this 20 years, man. You're gonna do this. You're gonna be doing this the rest of
yeah,
your life. You're a
yeah,
natural at this."
yeah, yeah,
And so he just pumped me up, and I
yeah.
just, that's a nice feeling to feel like that when you're
Yeah,
young.
he was a
You know?
wonderful man. I mean, I loved Mike to tell you the truth. I mean, I know he had this image, right? It was connected with the with the gambling thing. But think of the difference between then and now with regard to gambling. But Mike was a sweet man, and please give him my best if and when you ever run into him. He actually, in the midst of all of that, I had produced a little documentary on the history of baseball in Baltimore, and Mike financed it. Uh, and dedicated it to his brother, who his late brother at the time. So anyway, I have fond memories of that time. It was fun, right? That's the idea. It's have fun.
Oh, I would do it again. If somebody called me tomorrow and said we're gonna have Joe
Yeah,
Flacco and somebody, and like,
yeah,
yeah, man,
yeah,
got bagels on Wednesday night, sit around and
yeah,
talk football pickups. The part about the show that I do want to say, it was called Beat the Pros. You can find it out on YouTube. There's some clips. You guys made fun of me. Mike put together this whole thing. They made fun of me at the last thing. We wore tuxedos the last show because it was New Year's Eve. But yeah, it was sort of like Rodricks for breakfast. It's just
Yeah,
Warren shtick.
right.
And if you ever came to me with a budget and a television show, we'd have a hell of a show. We'd have fun together. If we could waste some money and get some guests. You think Letterman? I don't Fallon. I don't need any of that. We can do our thing. But I would say from that era and doing that show and making those picks, the thing that I think about when I laugh is that Warren had this thing with a movie with Eddie the Mush, who was a gambling guy, and he would get somebody in New York to get Eddie the Mush to make his picks. And it was part of the show. And it was from the Bronx Tale. A
Yeah.
Bronx Tale. It was the
I
movie that Mike liked, and he
yeah.
would have Eddie the Mush from Bronx Tale do picks every week, and the guy, the actor, apparently was camped out at a bar somewhere in like Queens. Like literally, this is the man's life, and I think Mike wanted to slide him $100, to as an
Yeah.
actor to put him on the show. And every week, I'm Eddie the Mush. You take the Buccaneers. You lay the points. You lay the points. Will Schwarz. So
It's a road dog. You go for the road dog. Yeah.
yeah, it was so anyway, it was a long
Yeah.
time ago. I love you,
Yeah.
I miss you, and I'm so thrilled that
Oh,
you
that's
put this thing together with Dan. And I would look, if Dan were hurting and we didn't sell no tickets and we had he sold the show sold out, and that's what Dan keeps saying to me. And that's what I'm going to say to Chris and Vanessa
yeah.
and Nick this week. It's like you can't even buy tickets, but like
It's
tell
crazy,
me a
isn't it?
little bit about the show in a way that if it's going to happen again, that you would try to sell me a ticket because there are no tickets to sell, which makes it even
Yeah, well,
weirder.
it's interesting because Dan, I think this is like the third or fifth. This is the fifth show that we've produced at the BMA, and every seat has been gone for every one of those, for every performance of
He's
every.
trying to find me too this weekend because I
Yeah,
was going to
yeah.
do the dress
It's
rehearsal.
a good, yeah. So the show really, it's about 1966. It's about the Orioles and the racial politics in the city and how they intersected in interesting and poignant ways, and how Frank Robinson's arrival at Baltimore, helped lift the Orioles, and how the city itself was lifted in that time. The city was a very troubled place. It was very, um, as a what are they, Maryland is it a southern state? Is it a northern state? This is the state that where there was slavery in Maryland. People don't realize that. It was a slave state, and yet it was not a Confederate state, which is one of the reasons why the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to people in Maryland. It was because we didn't join the Confederacy. But I digress. Anyway, it's really all about that, and how Baltimore struggled to kind of come of age in this very troubled time in the country with the civil rights battles, the assassinations. So it's an interesting story, and it uses the kind of the Orioles story as a vehicle for telling this story about Baltimore and Mayor McKeldin, who's an extraordinary man.
Well, it's a beautiful piece for me because I was born in '68. I
Mhm.
was born in this city
Oh,
because Louis came here from Chicago and brought two cousins.
yeah.
I'm the son of one of the cousins. And so people always ask me about that. But 68, I was born in October of '68. So this happened 2 years before my birth. But it has defined my life, right?
Oh,
Like everywhere I've ever been, I'm an Aparicio. My father would tell me about the '66 World Series, and then anyone that would ever see me, and to this day, Ron Cassie and I are going to get into this on the show, by the way. Will
yeah.
Schwarz is my guest. If you're listening out in Radio Land at WNST, he is one of the producers with Dan Rodricks of all of the Dan Rodricks series of plays. He was one time my producer for Beat the Pros 30 years ago on television. But
I want to show you one thing before
sure, yeah,
I
yeah.
forget.
You want to talk
So
baseball with me?
the
Of course you do.
Aparicio thing. So this is my a glove that I got when I was 10 years
Is that
old.
an Aparicio glove? What is that?
No, it's Nelson Fox.
Close
His
enough.
well, he was second base for when at right at
Close enough.
with the White Sox. I played with this glove, I don't know, 50 years, 40 years, something like that, something
Like
like that.
that.
Yeah. So I've had two baseball gloves in my life, and I have them both still.
Well, that's the defining thing for
Not
me
impressed.
that, like, the Orioles are locking me out of having a press pass and all that. This is where, like,
Really.
if I sat with Katie Griggs or Mark Fine or these Oriole people that are Nouveau, David Rubenstein, Michael Arrighetti, I'd say, my life's defined by the Aparicio thing because of baseball, how big it was in that era, in this city, the 66 Orioles, and Palmer still being a part of that, and Brooks and what he meant to this city and what the Orioles mean to this city. But even in Chicago, the 59 Go-Go Sox, and you mentioned Nellie Fox, that I worked in Chicago at the turn of the century after you and I did television together. And whenever I would pull my ID out in Midway Airport or O'Hare, the
Right.
person checking it would say, "Oh,
Yeah.
or in a bar in Chicago, I give ID,
Yeah.
whatever it would be."
Yeah.
But I told Ron Cassie this here, and he asked me about this because he called me to write for his story. So he and I are going to talk about this at Gertrude's as we continue to promote Dan Rodricks' play that's sold out, unfortunately. But Cassie called me 2 weeks ago when I invited him on the show. He's like, "Hey, I'm doing a story. I need to talk to you." I'm like, "Oh, I'm a source. Jeez, man, you must think
Yeah.
I must be
Yeah.
like a real media member or something."
Yeah.
So he talked to me about it, and I'm going to talk to him on the show because he asked me what it's like and like Louis and the thing. And I said, here's the thing about Louis and the 66 Orioles as someone who's married to it, for better or worse. When people come up to me, and a lot of it was women, men too, but women said to me, "I love the Orioles. Your cousin was my favorite.
Mm.
Like Louis was my favorite." And he was little and fast and swashbuckling in a way that like Muggsy Bogues was as a basketball player, right?
Mhm.
Just this like someone people didn't forget. And I would always say to him that that's my thing is that how popular my cousin was. And
Yeah.
people would come up to me and they weren't BSing me. And this comes down to 2 years ago, opening day, when David Rubenstein bought the team. He went in and sat in because this is his ego and who he is. He sat in with the broadcast team, and I was at opening day, glad hand and drinking beer. My wife texts me. She's watching the game on TV. She said, "David Rubenstein just sat in. He said that Louis Aparicio was his favorite Oriole."
That's
So
so
I
great.
told Cassie that, and
Yeah.
I said, and it wasn't like guys wouldn't come up to me because they would. They'd say
Yeah.
Louis, but Brooks, Boog,
Yeah.
they were Frank,
Yeah.
like everybody had a player, but
Yeah.
there was something about Louis that anybody who saw them play,
Yeah.
he was
When,
memorable and a Hall of Fame player. And I'll give all that, but just there was something about
yeah.
Louis that
When,
made
when did
Brooks treat
he,
me differently.
when did he come to the Orioles? Because I know he was one.
63, 64,
Okay.
and left in 68, went back to Chicago, and
Yeah.
then ended his career in Boston.
Yeah.
But I found a story, and I've told this one a handful of times, but the day that Frank Robinson died, and Louis is still alive, Louis is the oldest living Hall of Fame player. When Willie Mays passed, Louis became the
Wow.
oldest
I didn't know
living
that.
player. Yeah,
Yeah.
and his
Yeah.
baseball cards have escalated because of that, because he's the
Yeah.
oldest living player.
Yeah.
And he's also the only Venezuelan in the Hall of Fame. I say that
Oh,
during World
wow.
Baseball Classic
That's
week. So
awesome.
he's
Yeah.
the only Venezuelan in the, and that will change.
Yeah.
Ordonia, that's going to change.
Right.
So,
I remember him in, I mean, I am old, but in 1959 when they played the Dodgers and the Dodgers won 4 of 6. I think they won 4-2. Larry
Lee
Sherrill.
Steinberg tells me about that every time he does the show
Yeah.
because he was a Dodgers fan.
Yeah. I
And
was
and
too.
and this is the weird part of my journey in life. I was in LA. I've interviewed Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon, wrote Keep on Loving You, rock star
Yeah.
guy. He grew up in Chicago. And JY from Styx, ditto. Same guys. They both grew up in Chicago. One north side, one south side, but they both grew up. So Kevin Cronin met me backstage at a Styx concert 20 years ago, early in my marriage. And I got introduced to him by the guys in Styx, and JY said, "Hey, this is cousin of Louis Aparicio." Kevin Cronin's eyes got big as saucers, and
Yeah.
he remembered talking to me as a
Yeah.
kid at the paper. I had interviewed him and met him
Yeah.
one time. He
Yeah.
said, "Come with me right now." And I'm like, "Okay, dude." He grabs me and my wife from the backstage lounge area,
Yeah.
leads us back to the trailers that they were playing at, into his backstage trailer, into his dressing room, and he opens up the giant. You know how the traveling carnies and rock bands have the trunks, the
Right.
actor trunks with all their gear in it, right? With their
Right.
with their wardrobe.
Right.
He opened his wardrobe, and there was a picture of Louis Aparicio
Oh, man.
and the 59 White Sox
Yeah.
in his traveling case.
Oh,
He said, "I never go anywhere without the 59 Sox. They were
oh,
my team. They were the
that's
team of
so
my
great.
childhood. I
Yeah.
loved your cousin." Come on, man. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what baseball does for
that it
people,
is.
And
It
Dan
really
building a
is.
show around the glue that was the 66
Yeah,
Orioles makes me even more fascinated by it because I didn't
yeah,
live it. I only
yeah.
get to hear the stories,
Yeah, well, I'm sure you will like it, and I know you'll get in. But as I said about to the cast, I remember before the first show that we did, that you have no idea. People in Baltimore, they love it before they even sit down because it's about Baltimore. People in Baltimore are it's a very provincial town in that way, which I think is a good thing. But people love Baltimore. People in Baltimore love people, but love Baltimore. And it reminds me of Dan in some ways. His allure, his reminds me a little bit of Chris Thomas. Chris wasn't from Baltimore either, but he was. You wouldn't.
Was Chris from Eastern Shore? Where was he
No,
from?
he was from New Jersey.
I,
Yeah,
dude, I just learned
yeah. He
something
went to
about
South
Chris.
Carolina. He
Now,
went to.
he was my idol, right?
Well, I didn't know that, but I can see why.
So
He's a whack.
in night, Don Moeller, former Baltimore County executive, was my
Yeah,
my partner here. Don was my high school guidance counselor in 1982.
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
I went to high school as a sophomore because we had junior high in Dundalk, and I didn't get in to my journalism class in 10th grade. They when I put the elective in, they put me in gardening or something. They put
yeah,
me in something else, right? My parents drove me down to the school before I entered high school, and I walked into the front door and I met Don Moeller, who met me at the front door, and I said, I'm going to be the next Chris Thomas. I need to be in a journalism
yeah,
program.
yeah,
And Don Moeller would always say, You're going to be the next Chris Thomas. He said that to
yeah,
me when I was 13 years old.
yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
sweet.
So Chris Thomas, when I got to know Chris as a teenager, and he was a man at press conferences and stuff like that, I was just always a fan of Chris, and I got to
Yeah,
tell him that during his life.
yeah,
He sat with me at the Super Bowl in '01 when he was working in Tampa,
yeah,
and I know what a legend he was in Tampa,
yeah,
but I never knew he wasn't from Baltimore
yeah, yeah.
to
Well,
this minute.
that's the most people would think Dan is from Baltimore in the same way.
Well, I mean, it's the power
Yeah,
of television. I think it's the power of authenticity
yeah, exactly.
that when you're the real thing and Dan's the real thing, and 1966 is the real thing too. It's a show. Will Schwarz is my guest. He's involved with Dan and has been for longer than I have. I'm
Mhm.
involved with Dan. If you're involved with Baltimore, you want to be a part of these shows. And if I'm drumming up extra business for a spring or summer or a winter production for Dan shows, then good for me. Get down to the BMA because it's free. Get down and eat at Gertrude's before, during, or after. Well, not during, before or after the show, and enjoy yourself. Well, I'm so grateful for your time
Oh,
today. I've been wanting to have you on forever. Please come back and visit. All right.
absolutely. Anytime. My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Share some
I appreciate
Baltimore
it.
stories. Will Schwarz,
All
such a
righty.
great producer that he once employed me as a host. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking. Baltimore, positive.